Music breathed across the polished floor like a living thing, and light from 100 candles trembled on crystal and gold. In the great hall of Wycliffe, every glance was measured, every smile learned. A bow here, a curtsy there. Fans whispered like moths. It was a night gathered for spectacle, though no one would admit it. Nora Whitlow stood near the servants' door, half-shadowed by a potted orange tree. She wore her plain grey dress and the blue ribbon she kept for good days. Her hands were clean and folded, but they held the faint dye stain of laundry work no soap could conquer. She listened for the bell that called servants and tried not to look at the women who had never mended a sleeve. The prince stood on the dais, calm and tall. James Wycliffe. His coat was not the brightest in the room, which told Nora he chose it himself. He lifted a hand and the violins lowered their bows. Conversation thinned into one line of breath. "If you will indulge me," he said. His voice carried easily, not raised, not pleading. "I wish to conduct a small experiment of character." A ripple moved through the room, a small wave of interest breaking against diamonds. Men leaned on canes polished by other hands. Ladies touched pearls and looked pleased to be where a sentence might begin that no one had heard before. "I will present a sum," he continued. 10,000 in gold, a week's time, and 5 recipients. A gasp hid itself behind a fan. 10,000 was not a sum. It was a bell that could unhouse a village if it rang the wrong way. 5 women, he added, and a murmur rose again. 4 of our distinguished guests, and 1 from our household below stairs. That last phrase did not murmur. It snapped. A laugh came from the card table near the window. It had the kind of brightness that cuts. "Gold in the wrong hands turns to dust," someone said, just low enough to pretend it was not meant to be heard. The words fluttered and perched on shoulders like little birds of malice. Nora felt heat climb from her collarbone to her ears. She would have gone soft and invisible if she could. She pressed her hands tighter, the tips of her fingers whitening, and listened for her name in the tumble of grand ones. "Lady Arabella Sinclair," the prince said first, with a nod. The room sighed at the music of that name. Arabella moved with practiced grace. A feather in her hair trembled like her own heartbeat had agreed to be charming. "Lady Honoria Pembroke," a smile that had been sharpened for years. "Miss Lydia Greystone." Pink cheeks, eyes like the promise of a song that might be new and sweet if someone taught it the words. Lady Margaret Ashdown, cool, precise. Her gloved hand did not tremble when she reached for anything. Nora had seen her once dismiss a stable boy without looking at his face. The prince let the silence bloom for a breath before he spoke again. He did not look at the ceiling or the floor. He looked at the place where the servants clustered. "And Miss Nora Whitlow," he said, "of the household staff." Her name sounded smaller than the others, but it landed with a weight she could feel in her shoes. All the turned heads drew her into being. Nora walked, though it seemed at first that her feet had stayed with the tree. The floor was a lake of waxed wood and attention, her hem whispered. She curtsied. It was neat, learned in the laundry when the older women had laughed and said, "You never know when manners will save you, girl." She did not look up immediately. When she did not look high. She looked level where a person is. The prince's expression was not mocking. Time softened its edges around the eyes. He watched as if the night had just promised to be interesting in a way that mattered. "Each of you will receive equal shares," he said, "sufficient to amount to 10,000 in total. In a week you will present what you have done with it, not to prove taste, but to reveal purpose." Taste and purpose, 2 words that wore the same dress to very different weddings. The hall heard one more clearly than the other. The steward came forward with a tray. Mr. Calvert. His hair shone with oil and his smile did not reach all of his face. 5 pouches lay on polished wood, their mouths tied with waxed cord. Coins spoke to one another in low metal voices with every step he took. He offered the first to Lady Arabella. She let her fingers drift over it, just touching. She laughed softly, and the pouch laughed back. Lady Honoria took hers with the satisfaction of someone who had never doubted that the world belonged to her. Miss Lydia bit her lip and accepted, as if she were being handed a secret she might not keep. Lady Margaret weighed hers as if she knew what a foal cost, and how often a groom might lie. When the tray reached Nora, Calvert paused as if looking for permission that did not exist. She kept her eyes on the pouch, then on his hand, then passed both to the prince's face. She reached not like a child grabbing sweets, but like someone lifting a sleeping infant that might cry if held wrong. The leather was warm from other hands. In her palms, it felt heavier than it looked. She wrapped it in her plain shawl without thinking, a habit born of years of carrying breakable things that did not belong to her. A soft mew of amusement went around the room. "A shawl," someone said lightly, "for fear the gold should catch a chill." Nora kept her mouth from betraying what her heart did. Her heart wanted to run. Her mouth held. "There will be observers," the prince added. The words were simple. They meant much. Not to interfere, only to witness. Witnesses. The word drifted over Nora and settled like a thin frost. She did not fear being seen when she had a task. She feared the kind of seeing that becomes a story told by someone else. "Begin your week," he said. "We reconvene next Friday at 8. The orchestra lifted its bows. Conversation stepped back into the space it had ceded to silence. The night resumed its performance, only now it had a plot. A gentleman near the terrace remarked to his companion, "All very philosophical, all very French." They both smiled as if they had proven something. A footman shouldered past Nora with a tray and said, not unkindly, "Mind," which meant less than nothing. She stepped toward the door to the corridor below stairs. The shawl was a tight parcel in her arms. The bones of the coins were sharp through the cloth. They pressed lines into her skin that would mark her for an hour. She wanted to go where names were used without introductions. She wanted to breathe where the light did not ask whom it touched. Behind her, the ladies regathered like constellations. She sensed the tug of their gravity even as she left it. Lady Honoria spoke to Lady Margaret in that pretty voice that tips over in cold weather. "It is not a sin to be amused," she said. "It is a sin to pretend not to be." Lady Margaret's eyes flicked toward Nora's back and away. "She will buy a silk ribbon," she said, "or a pie. It hardly matters. The lesson will be learned." Miss Lydia did not speak. She watched Nora's shoulders and wished to ask her something kind, then did not. Lady Arabella lifted her fan. "If I buy diamonds, it is because they last," she said to her circle, "and everyone benefits when beauty is seen. It improves the soul." Nora kept walking. She did not speed. Run, and they turn you into a chase. Walk, and you remain a person. In the service corridor, the air changed. It was cooler, and smelled of soap and onion and the damp iron of the pump. The noise of the ballroom became a memory that tapped at the wall but did not enter. She let out a breath she had not meant to hold. Mary, one of the kitchen maids with quick hands and quicker words, caught sight of the shawl bundle and widened her eyes. "Well, if that isn't a church plate come home," she said. Then she laughed and clapped a hand over her mouth, ashamed and delighted in the same moment. "Sorry, Nora. Only look at us, you, with that." "I will not have it long," Nora said. It was true. She did not know yet how she would spend it, but she knew it would not live with her any more than a storm lives with a field. "You take care," Mary said, less bright now. "The hall bites when it plays." The bell for the servants rang briefly. Nora turned toward the sound and then away. She was not needed on a tray. She was needed by her own promise. She had not made it aloud. She had made it when the prince said words that did not belong to the room. Purpose. At the bottom of the narrow stair, a draught lifted the hair at the nape of her neck. The door that led to the courtyard was ajar. Beyond it, spring air had found its way in, carrying the scent of damp stone and the faintest suggestion of manure from the stables. The world was still out there. It would not bow to chandeliers. It never had. She turned the bundle in her arms, so no coin would slip. Her fingers found the knot of the shawl and tugged it tighter. She imagined the weight as a body, not a thing. If she thought of it as a thing, it would misbehave. If she thought of it as a life, she would carry it carefully. In the shadow by the door to the steward's rooms, a man cleared his throat. Mr. Calvert stepped into her path as if he had been arranged there by a stagehand. His smile was full again, all the way up to his eyes now, which was worse. "Miss Whitlow," he said, "stay a moment for the prince's pleasure." A word. "The prince will not need me," she said, keeping her voice even. She moved to pass. He did not stand aside. He did not touch her. He made her go around him, which is a kind of touching. "The prince needs the experiment to be orderly," he said. "Do not show the coins to your neighbors. Do not solicit advice. Do not misunderstand your place. It would be Unfortunate. Orderly, Nora repeated. The word settled on her like a too heavy shawl. I will not forget. Good girl, he said, and she did not know what she would have said or done if the footman had not come in a hurry with a tray and forced Calvert to move his shoulder. She slipped past into the small night of the courtyard. The sky over the roofs was a deep blue that promised only itself. She could hear the river through the trees if she listened hard and forgot the violins. Her aunt's cottage would be dark now. She thought of that and took comfort from it. She would go there early. She would hold the gold in both hands and tell the truth to someone who would hear it without putting it on a shelf. She would not cry. There were things to do first. The shawl warmed against her chest. The coins did not warm. They were themselves stubborn and blind. She wondered suddenly and sharply how it was that a thing could be so dumb and yet make everyone clever and cruel at once. A carriage rattled into the yard, its horses snorting, harness jingling like a bracelet made for an animal too strong for jewelry. The driver glanced at her without surprise. Servants moved at all hours. The wheel splashed through a shallow puddle that caught a smear of candlelight from the hall window and broke it into tiny pieces. She crossed to the arch that led out to the lane toward the village. A figure stepped from the deeper dark and blocked the way for just a heartbeat. He wore a coat shiny at the elbows, a hat brushed without care, a smile that tried too hard to be friendly. "Miss Whitlow," he said. His voice had the slick of a man who oils his words because he does not believe in their bones. She knew him, Mr. Hobbs, the parish collector. He always smiled too broad, as if showing all his teeth might convince you he had eaten nothing of yours. "Good evening," she said. The bundle did not move. Her arms were the only walls she had, and they would hold. He looked down at the shawl as if it had spoken. "Fortunate girl," he said. "Fortunate haul. Fortunate times." "Good night," she said again, polite to the last inch. He leaned in a fraction, enough to make the air feel close. "If you want your brother out," he murmured, "you'll pay the right people." Nora held her breath long enough to feel the beat of her heart against the coins. She did not step back. She let his words hang like a damp cloth that would dry if left alone. "My brother will come out by right," she said, "not by favor." Hobbs shifted his weight. The lamp over the arch trembled with a draught, and his face jumped by shadow and light like a trick. "Rights are well and good in sermons," he said softly. "Between us, time is the dearer thing." "How much time buys time?" she asked, because to pretend she did not know what he meant would be to make him stronger. He half smiled, as if they were partners. 7 sovereigns buys 2 days of patience from a certain turnkey who owes me a small kindness. 10 builds a better cushion, and a little something for my trouble, of course. Nora looked at the lane. The village slept with its windows shut and its shutters tight. The gold pressed its shape into her arms. She thought of Thomas's face at the bars the last time she had seen him, the way he had tried to make a joke and failed. She thought of Aunt Ida's hands doing a task and not stopping because the world was ridiculous. 7, she said, and a list. Hobbs's eyebrows tilted. Of what? "Those most pressed by the arrears this week," she said. "In writing, names and sums." He made a show of thinking, but his eyes had already agreed. "A list is a harmless thing," he said. "Ink is cheap. Then you will not mind giving me the names." He extended his hand toward the shawl. "Since we are friends." Nora did not put her pouch in his palm. She unwrapped the corner of the shawl and counted the sovereigns into her own hand, then into his, one by one. The coins made that soft, confident sound metal makes when it believes in itself. She watched each vanish into his pocket as if they had dropped into a well without bottom. 7, she said. "And your handwriting." Hobbs drew a little notebook from his coat, as if that had been the plan all along. He licked the pencil as if it were a sweet, and wrote with a speed that came from practice. Mrs. Peck, widow, £2.6. Samuel Craddock, cobbler, £1.9. Corporal Ames, returned from the peninsula with a limp that had not charmed a single magistrate, £4.2. The page filled with names that could be spoken in the lane without permission. He tore the leaf and folded it once. "A pleasure," he said, the word greasy with use. "And the turnkey's patience will begin with the sun." Nora tucked the list into her sleeve where her skin could feel that it existed. "I will have a receipt," she said. "A receipt," Hobbs repeated, amused. "For patience. You are a treasure." "For the 7, she said, her voice flat as a plank. Write it. He sighed as if she had asked for a toe from his foot. He scribbled something that could be read and signed it with his name made too important. He passed it over. There. Happy bookkeeping. True bookkeeping, she said. He touched the brim of his hat. Good night, Miss Whitlow. Give my love to the jailer. Give your conscience to a fire, she said in her head, and aloud she said, Good night. She set off at once, before any courage she had borrowed from her own anger should thin. The lane met the road beyond the wall and ran toward York, a dark ribbon that smelled of damp stone and animals, and the faint sweetness of things that had bloomed and finished. The stars were not visible for the thin cloud that had come in from the river, and the lamps along the way were too far apart to encourage a woman walking alone. Still, there were things that had to be done when they had to be done. She passed the hedges where children played in daylight, the stump where someone had carved initials poorly, the half-fallen gate that had not been repaired because it worked as it was. The road widened near the city and took on a different sound, feet and wheels and a deeper hum of voices that did not know her name. York's alleys had their own kingdoms at this hour. Men with sacks moved in shadows like purposeful ghosts. A dog barked behind a door and then gave up. A woman laughed in a house where the shutters never closed entirely. Nora kept to the edges and carried herself as if the street belonged to her feet and always had. The jail squatted like a certainty, low, stubborn, set in its ways. Its stones were old and knew all the weather there was. The keeper at the counter wore a wig that had seen better wigs. He looked over it at her shawl bundle with the too familiar interest of someone who had been near need for so long he could smell it even when it wore soap. I wish to speak for a prisoner, Nora said. Thomas Whitlow. Relation? He asked. Sister, she said. I have brought the beginnings of what is due and a sign of further payment. Beginnings, he echoed. He set down his tea as if it had disappointed him. How many beginnings make an end? 7 sovereigns, she said. She set 3 on the counter and kept her hand over the others as if kindness might blow them away. The keeper looked at the coins as a miller looks at grain, interested, not moved. 7, he said. Your brother owes more than 7. He made a show of checking a ledger that did not need checking. He is to be transferred in 2 days' time to the county hold. We are full here. I have arranged with Mr. Hobbs, she said, letting disgust be only a dusting on the surface of her voice. 2 days' patience, he will not object. Mr. Hobbs does not sign my books, the keeper said, but he did not push the coins back. 2 days is dear, dearer than a life turned worse, she said. I have a receipt. She laid Hobbs's scrawl on the counter. The keeper read it with interest he pretended not to have. Hobbs had written his name large the way small men do. The keeper nodded, slow, a man making a calculation he did not intend to share. Very well. 2 days, no more, and if the rest does not appear with the dawn of the 3rd, he goes where he was bound. He took the 7 and slid them into a drawer that did not creak, because it had been opened too many times to remember how. May I see him? Nora asked. The keeper hesitated. 5 minutes, he said. It is not visiting day. He led her down a corridor that smelled of wet wool and something like despair baked into lime. Thomas was in a cell with 2 other men, both asleep with their mouths open like little boys worn out by play. He stood when he saw her, and then stood taller, as if breadth might do what height could not. Nora, he said, and his voice was the same as when they were children, and he had gotten himself locked in the shed by accident and called it an adventure. You should not be here at this hour. There was not a better hour, she said, cold already in her fingers, though she had not noticed before. She put her hand through the bars and he put his over it. His palm was hot. I have bought 2 days, she said, with Hobbs's blessing and the keeper's sigh. You will not be moved. Thomas exhaled. The breath finished a story and began another. 2 days, he said. Nora, you did not— Hush, she said. You will save your talking for when you are home. She watched his face change, as if someone had slowly pulled his bones into a kinder shape. I have a list of names, she said. You are not the only one breathing shallow. He laughed, short, pained at the edges. You always did love a list. It keeps the world from lying, she said. Or it tries. The keeper coughed to remind them that time was a coin, and he collected it. Nora squeezed Thomas's fingers once, and he squeezed back as if to say everything they could not say with the bars between them. "I will come back," she said. "Hold on." "I will hold," he said. "I have practice." She left before she could take back the strength she had given him with her eyes. The corridor gave her back to the small room with the tea and the wig and the door to the night. The keeper did not look at her as she passed, which was a small courtesy. Outside, the air felt new, as if the city had been re-lacquered while she was inside. She did not wish to return to the hall yet. There were other things that pulled. The pawnbroker's was on a narrow street that smelled of metal and onion, and a happiness not advertised. His bell gave a little cry when she pushed the door. He looked up from his small, round spectacles and made a face that could have been welcome or warning. "Miss," he said, "honest trade or memory trade?" "Memory," she said, surprising herself, "and perhaps a little honesty." "Well," he said, pleased with his own answer in advance, "we deal in both, but memory costs more and argues worse." The shop was a landscape made of other people's lost endings, watches that had been given with speeches, chains, a violin with a nick at its heart, a Bible with a name in a hand so careful it hurt. Nora felt her own name tuck itself inside her bones, as if to avoid being taken. "I am looking for items pawned some years ago," she said. "Female trinkets, perhaps, belonging to a household of rank." The broker's smile slanted. "Rank is a smell hard to wash off," he said. "We have had a few such. Times turned, ships late, gentlemen careless. What will you pay for curiosity?" "I will pay for what I choose," she said, "and I will not be cheated because I know less about brass than you." He barked a laugh that was truly pleased. "Good, come then." He opened a drawer beneath the counter and a smaller drawer inside that one. He set out a mismatched parade, a silver buckle, a pearl ring with a pearl that had learned to behave, a locket with a worn hinge, another with a floral engraving. Nora lifted each gently and put it down as if it breathed. The second locket had a crest so faint she might have imagined it if she had wanted to. The third had a single letter engraved where a thumb would rub. M. The cut of that letter was particular and bold. A hand that did not ask permission. She turned it over. On the back, invisible unless one expected to find it, a tiny impression of the Wycliffe crest. Her heart made a small hard sound against her ribs. "This one," she said. Her voice did not give away what her fingers felt. "And what sits inside it?" The broker raised his eyebrows. "Inside is silk and hope," he said. "And a bit of paper, if I remember. Tucked. These old things like to keep company with their own stories." He fetched a thin knife and lifted the little lid made for the silk to rest in. Behind it, folded small and no longer truly white, a paper sat, and with it a pawn ticket rolled tight as a sleeping caterpillar. The ticket had a date that could drink from the same well as her childhood. The paper bore a red pressed shape that had once been a seal, broken. There was handwriting. Her breath wanted to move over it and did not. "What is your price?" she asked, eyes on the broker and not the letter. "For the locket, fair. For the paper, more than fair. It is not customary to sell such." "It was pawned," she said. "It is customary to sell back what was given up." He weighed his sense of morality and his want of coin, and chose as men often do. He named a number that wanted to be cruel and settled for unkind. Nora counted out the coins with the care she used for linen when it mattered. Her gold dwindled and did not cry. When he reached for the paper in a way that suggested he might change his mind, she put her hand over his without force and said, "Lo, we made a bargain. There is a witness. There is only me," he said, unsettled. "And your bell," she said. It made him laugh again and finish the deal, rather than be the sort of man who breaks his own shop's music. She did not open the letter. She tucked it, still folded, into the lining of her dress above her heart, where it pricked like a nettle, and promised to keep her awake. She put the locket into the pocket of her skirt, heavy and small at once. The pawn ticket she slid under the ribbon at her wrist. She collected a receipt for the purchase, and watched him sign and stamp it with his own little pride. When she stepped into the street, the day had begun to grow at the edges of the sky. Morning would soon ask the city to pretend it belonged to good people. She had 2 days for Thomas, and a list of names and a locket that had once rested against a woman's throat who had never washed a floor. She could feel the shape of something larger than herself just beyond words, like a house in fog. On her way back through the market, she paused for paper and pencils, cheap and many. She bought a measure of coal to be delivered with her name and the name of the parish school written on a slate by the boy who took orders. She did not count these things as part of the test. She counted them as part of the day. By the time she reached the lane that led to Wycliffe Hall, birds had begun to speak up from hedges, as if they were paid to announce dawn. The sky was rinsed, but the ground held the night's damp in the low places. Her shoes, not made for marching on affairs of state, carried her anyway. At the wall she stopped and made herself still. It was a habit she had learned not from fear, but from wanting to see without being seen. The hall rose beyond the trees, windows winking gold, smoke rising in confidences from the chimneys. Servants would be lighting fires, polishing silver, bringing the grand rooms back from the dead in time for breakfast to appear as if it had never been born. She crossed the yard on the path the scullery maids used when they felt wicked enough to walk straight rather than around. The laundry windows glowed with steam and effort. The light in the steward's office cut a square out of the dawn and made it seem more solid. She turned her head a fraction and looked through the glass as one looks into water. Mr. Calvert stood with his back half-turned, a ledger open on the desk in front of him. The pages faced the window, and she could see columns and lines and seals stacked to one side like small red moons. His pen lay across the sheet, as if exhausted by certainty. Then his face lifted as if a thought had tapped it from inside, and his eyes struck the window where she stood as though they knew to find her there, and he reached out with 2 fingers and shut the book with a decisive thud. The morning did not ask her how she had slept. It pushed her into its work as always, only now people watched where they had not watched before. The kitchen filled with the cluck of pans and the quick chorus of knives on boards. Mary lifted an eyebrow when Nora came in with damp hem and a face set for a task. Then Mary remembered the shawl bundle, and something mean and bright ran across her mouth before she swallowed it and looked away. "Bread wants turning," Cook said, as if bread were a sullen child. "And the salver needs polishing. We are to gleam today." Nora took the salver because it showed a face when clean and told the truth when not. She rubbed the soft chalk in patient circles, the silver cloud haze becoming shine. The metal threw back a Nora, who looked composed and older than yesterday. Behind that ghost face, she could see the kitchen door open and close with the quick temper of the house. 2 footmen came in, laughing in the careful way men do when they know their laughter can be a whip. One of them, Jem, the taller, tossed a cloth onto the table near her elbow as if making a point that had nothing to do with cloth. "I'll be off to York with the small cart," he announced. "Orders to fetch ribbons that aren't of last year, and biscuits the prince's guests pretend not to eat." Mary glanced at Nora, then away, then back as if the glance had been on a string. "Nora would be glad of a seat as far as the green if you pass that way," she said too loudly, as people do when they mean to be kind and cannot resist setting up a little theatre. Jem looked at Nora's hands on the salver and at his own reflection in the barely polished shine. He smiled and practiced not being cruel, then decided to practice later. "Not fitting," he said. "The cart's for parcels and gentlemen's hats. No room for an experiment wrapped in a shawl." The other footman snorted and then, remembering himself, made it a cough. "Besides," he added, eager to help, "if the gold turns to dust on the way, we'll be blamed for poor driving." Nora kept her eyes on the circle of her cloth and said nothing because there were only 2 choices when men threw pebbles into your pool: ripple for them or be a stone yourself. She chose to be a stone. The salver cleared in a sweep of light, and her face behind it stopped being theirs. Cook tried a scowl that might have meant sympathy if she had had time to teach it to her eyebrows. "Leave off teasing," she said without looking up. It helped no one and changed nothing. When the bell rang for the upstairs breakfast, Nora was sent up with a tray of sugared fruit arranged like good intentions. The corridor outside the breakfast room had a smell of coffee and furniture that cost more than anyone said aloud. Voices floated as if they did not need bodies. She met 2 housemaids returning from setting up the morning fire in the blue drawing room. One of them leaned to the other and whispered, too near Nora to miss, "They say she bought Midnight a longer candle for her brother, with money meant for gowns." "Midnight looks the same in every room," the other whispered back. "What will she buy today? A crown for the parish pig?" Nora passed them, as she would pass a thorn hedge, without haste, trusting her skin to do its work. A gentleman came out of the breakfast room at an angle and almost collided with her. He stepped back as if she had been a chair. He did not apologize because a chair does not expect it. In the corridor that led down again to the service stair, the prince came the other way. He had a letter in his hand and a small furrow between his brows, as if the letter had asked him a question he could not yet answer. He saw Nora, saw the business in her arms, and something in his mouth softened. He looked past her shoulder to where Jem had laughed, and then down at her shoes, which were damp with the morning. He did not speak. He inclined his head the smallest possible degree that still counts as honor. If he had stepped forward, if he had said a word in a swallow of the hall where people drank words for sport, he would have crushed her under the attention. He did not. She dipped the neat curtsy that had rescued her last night and moved on. It was not nothing. It was a recognition that could be folded and kept for later, like a clean handkerchief. In the laundry yard, the steam made a small weather of its own. Linen hissed under irons. The mangle creaked like a ship that would never see water. Women's voices rose and fell around work as they always had. A line of shirts snapped in a breeze that had waited politely for its turn. Nora found the space behind the mangle where the wall made a corner, private enough for a breath, not private enough for anyone to call it selfish. She stood with her back to the brick, shut her eyes, and let a few tears slide down without permission. They were not for Jem. They were not for whispers. They were for the sudden weight of being pointed at with a princely finger and tossed into the air to see if she would land on her feet. Mary came to the door and saw her and did not come in, which was grace. The steam covered the redness. When Nora opened her eyes, the day had the shape of a problem again, and not of a person. She wiped her face with the clean edge of her apron and retied the blue ribbon at the back of her neck, the way she did when the work changed names. Then she went by the outer corridor, away from eyes, toward the row of rooms where the house kept its records and counted its own heartbeat. The door to the steward's office had been shut the last time she passed. Now it was ajar by the width of a thumb. A spill of light made the dust in the corridor look like a slow river. From inside came the sound of pen against paper and the soft thud of a seal pressed into cooling wax. She stood very still. The corridor had a habit of telling on those who moved in it. A smear of her reflection lay on the glass of the door-pane. In it, she looked like a question. She breathed shallow and felt the small prick of the folded paper she had purchased pressed above her stays, like a small, insistent truth, reminding her that paper and ink could be as sharp as knives. She rapped once, lightly, with her knuckle. "Come," Calvert said, without turning. Nora pushed the door, stopping at the line where the corridor became carpet. "Sir," she said, respectful, as years had taught her to be, "I have brought a message from Cook for the accounts book of provisions. She asks whether the note from the grocer has been paid." Calvert glanced up only enough to let her exist. "Left-hand shelf," he said. "Second from the bottom." He went back to the page, his pen making tidy sounds. Even his ink seemed to obey him. Nora stepped in and crossed to the shelves that lined the wall opposite his desk. She kept her eyes low, but the air above the desk was thick with the smell of sealing wax and paper that had decided to be important. She found the provisions book where he had said it would be, because of course it was where he had said. Calvert liked a world that sat when told. She made a small show of opening the book and running a finger down a column. Her other eye, the one that had learned to count without being seen to count, took in the ledger on the desk. The page open before him bore a title in a hand she had already begun to recognize. Arrears, Parish Collections, Extraordinary. The numbers marched neatly like soldiers in their Sunday boots. Each name had been reduced to a line's worth of ink, the sum beside it like a price put on a body. At the bottom of one column, where a note would sit if a conscience wished to make itself known, 2 letters clung like barnacles to a rock. HR. They were not initials for a person she knew in the village. They belonged to someone who did not live with people at all. His Royal. Her stomach tightened as if it had clenched around a fist. Below that, the flourish of Mr. Calvert's signature appeared, precise as a drawing that had practiced in the mirror. Here and here and here it repeated, obedient and necessary. Nora's breath made the smallest cloud against the polished back of the chair near the desk. She shifted the provisions book in her hand and coughed, a sound she could claim was dust if challenged. He did not look up. The man trusted his room more than he distrusted her. She took 2 small steps as if searching for something else on the shelves. Her eye caught the edges of another ledger half pulled from its place, a sliver of paper wedged to keep a page. The slip bore a date and the words Extraordinary Collections, Disposition. She could not read the lines, only the headings: Parish, Arrears, Reallocation. Her hand went to her apron pocket and found the stub of a pencil she kept for grocery tallies and small repairs. The hem of her apron was plain cotton, the selvage a neat line. She lifted the edge so it hid her hand, and using the linen as a desk, scratched the numbers that mattered into the cloth, making the weave hold a truth it had never been asked to hold before. Names, 2, 3. Sums. The initials, HR, the page number, glimpsed at the top in a neat hand, 47. Her heart was too loud. She quieted it by naming tasks: coal for the school, ink for receipts, bread for Aunt Ida, one name at a time. Her pencil made faint, stubborn marks that would wash out if she let them, and she would not let them. "Have you found it?" Calvert asked, still not lifting his head. "Yes, sir," she said. "All is in order." She closed the provisions book with gentle fingers, the way one closes a child's mouth when it is about to say the wrong thing. Out in the corridor, a foot fell, then another. The rhythm had the measured, confident sound of a man who owns the hallway under his boots. Nora slid a half step so that her body made less shadow on the desk, but the morning was what it was, and shadows do as they please. She could feel the door behind her wake to movement as air shifted, hinges thinking of their own voices. She copied one last figure, small and fierce, into the hem, and in that same breath the floorboard outside voiced a weight she knew, and the door eased inward with a tired little sigh, and Mr. Calvert's footsteps moved toward the threshold. Aunt Ida's cottage sat like a pause at the edge of the estate, its thatch tidy, its garden small and brave against the wind. Nora knocked and then went in, because their lives had taught them that doors are for keeping weather out more than people. Aunt Ida was already at the table with the morning's bread and a chipped cup that had lost its handle to a careless elbow years ago. She looked up and read Nora's face as if a message had been pinned there. She rose and took Nora's shoulders and pressed her to sit without asking whether she would. Questions were for later, warmth first. "You have carried the night on your back," Aunt Ida said. "Put it down here a bit." Nora took the folded shawl from her lap and set it on the table. Even wrapped, the gold made its own presence, a small mountain under cloth. Aunt Ida looked at it once and looked away, the way one looks away from a fire to keep one's eyes. "What has the hall done now?" she asked, not unkindly, as she cut the bread into fair slices. Nora told it straight: the chandeliers, the prince's calm voice, the 5 pouches of coin, the remark about dust, the names called, the weight in her hands, Hobbs in the arch, the keeper's wig and Thomas's heat, the locket tucked under silk, and the letter she had not opened. The ledger with its neat soldiers of numbers and those 2 small letters at the bottom that could ruin a man or reveal one. Aunt Ida listened with her head bent, the way she listened to a kettle that threatened to boil over. She made small sounds that could have been prayers or curses, depending on whether a church stood in earshot. When Nora reached the part where she had stood in the laundry corner to let her tears fall, Aunt Ida's mouth softened into the kind that kisses still know how to shape, even when they have not been asked for in years. "And what will you do?" Aunt Ida asked at last, not because she did not know the shape of her niece's mind, but because a thing becomes more itself when it is spoken. "I will not buy ribbons," Nora said, and her laugh came out as a breath with stubbornness in it. She brought out the folded leaf from Hobbs with its names and sums. "Here, these are the ones he wrote without thinking that a list can be a sword." Aunt Ida wiped her hands and took the page in fingers that knew thread, not ink. She read aloud, slow, making each name rest a moment in the room so it would not be merely a noise. Mrs. Peck, Samuel Craddock, Corporal Ames, Mrs. Ellery, the widow Barnes, John Tully. She tapped a name with her nail. "This one kept your mother in eggs when the fever took your father. And this one, Mrs. Ellery, makes shift to wash strangers' shirts to dress her own baby." "Then these come first," Nora said. She drew the paper closer and turned it, counting in the margins with her pencil. £2.6, 194 and 2. She totaled what she could do today without cheating tomorrow. "I will bring the debts to their doors. I will have receipts for each. I will make them seal those receipts. so a man cannot pretend later that a signature means less than wax. Aunt Ida nodded, a soldier seeing a plan set on a kitchen table. If gold weighs you down, spend it lifting others, she said, and do not leave a single debt behind that can trip you later. They will try to make you stumble with your own kindness. They will sign, Nora said. They will seal. I will have proof enough to make a door stay open when someone wishes it shut. Aunt Ida poured tea in the handleless cup and pushed it across. You were born with your mother's temper, she said. It does not shout. It does not wave its arms. It stays and makes the world move an inch. Nora drank and felt the tea travel through her like sense. She folded the shawl back to show a glint of the pouch, not for pride, but because secrets sometimes rot if they do not see the air. Aunt Ida's eyes tightened. Be quick, she said. Be careful. Bring nothing back that ought to be left in a ledger's mouth. She was quick. She wrapped the pouch again and tucked the list into her sleeve and set out toward the village. The morning had burned off its first chill, and the road looked less like a problem and more like a way. She crossed the green where boys set traps for one another's feet and ran on with shrieks when the traps were too clever. She went to a door she had known since she could reach a knocker and rapped 3 times. Mrs. Peck opened in her apron, flour dust on her arm where she had wiped a thought away. She started to smile and stopped when she saw the shawl bundle. Nora, she said cautiously, as if the name itself might cost. You bring news? I bring what the news always wants, Nora said. I bring an ending to a thing that should not have begun. Your arrears, £2.06. I will pay it now. Girl, Mrs. Peck whispered, glancing over her shoulder at a room that held nothing worth stealing. No, I do not take charity that will be thrown back at me later. This is not charity, Nora said. This is a purchase. I am buying back your name from a list that has no right to it, and I will have a paper that says so. Mrs. Peck's mouth trembled, and her eyes went to the edge where tears are kept. If you shame me, she said, I will not forgive you. I ask you to forgive me for nothing, Nora said. I ask you to stand with me when the school needs a bench built. That is all. She set the coins on the table in the little front room like she was laying out a patient. Where is your last receipt? Mrs. Peck rummaged in a box that had once held ribbons and now held proofs of hurt. She found a leaf, the ink browned with age. Here. Nora folded the new payment into the old, and together they walked to Hobbs's place, 2 women with their chins set at the same angle. Hobbs made a performance of surprise, then a business of reluctance, and at last sat with his pen. Receipt, Nora said, and the seal. He looked as if she had asked him to apologize to his own supper. The seal is for the estate, he said, not for every kitchen table that thinks it's a bank. Fetch it, she said. You collect in their name, you will seal in their name. Hobbs made a study of her face as if looking for a loophole, and found none. He sent his lad for the seal, and when it came he pressed the red wax down with the solemnity of a ceremony he would deny under oath. The crest made its neat little authority on the page. Mrs. Peck watched it bloom and let her shoulders drop for the first time in months. Next, Nora said after they had left Hobbs to his sulk and his ink, she did not rest to enjoy the small victory. It was not hers to enjoy. They went to Samuel Craddock, who pretended not to be at home until his dog decided to greet Nora as if she were a butcher. Samuel opened the door because dogs have their own economy. He tried to refuse and failed at it, because failing had been his habit, and this was a better thing to fail at. He came to Hobbs's with them and signed with a hand that shook until it steadied. They found Corporal Ames at the edge of the green with his boot off, rubbing the foot that no longer obeyed like a soldier who had lost his favorite horse. He grinned when he saw Nora. Miss Whitlow, he said, if you have come to collect, I have only stories, and most of them are not suitable for a church. I am not collecting, she said. I am returning. £4.02. You will walk up to Hobbs and look him in the eye while he seals your freedom. Ames did as told with a joke or two that made Hobbs's ears turn pink. The wax took the crest again and again, as if it were learning to be useful. At each door, Nora noted the sum, the seal, the date. At each table, she repeated the same phrase. This is a debt that had no right to your name. I have bought it from the lie that claimed it. Keep this paper dry, and keep your name. The coins shrank as they were meant to. The receipts grew, a stack stitched together by a ribbon Aunt Ida had cut from an old dress. Somewhere between Mrs. Ellery's doorstep and the widow Barnes's kettle, something inside Nora smoothed and found its stride. It was not joy. It was the feeling of a cart's wheel finding the track and refusing to jolt any longer. By midday she had paid what the morning could carry. She let herself sit on Aunt Ida's doorstep for a handful of breaths, the ribboned receipts on her lap like a sleeping cat, warm with the sun. Aunt Ida came out with a cup and set it beside her and did not speak. They watched a boy chase a hat the wind kept and gave back and kept again. "Will they come for you?" Aunt Ida asked finally, as one asks if rain will come. "When they see you have learned how to ask for the seal?" "They may," Nora said, "but the seal is honest when it is forced to be." She thought of Calvert's tidy desk and the small letters that could mean a prince or a prayer. "And there is a man at the middle of this who is used to being obeyed." Aunt Ida made a sound that could have been a laugh and could have been a cough. "They all are," she said. "Men who like pens. What of the prince?" "He watched yesterday," Nora said slowly. "He did not laugh. He is either better than his house taught him to be, or better at hiding that he is not." She fingered the receipt's edges, feeling where the wax had cooled into certainty. "I will walk the rest of the list this afternoon, and then the school." "The school," Aunt Ida said, pleased. "Buy it books that will stay even when hands leave. Buy it coal and chalk and a clock, so no one can lie about time." "I will," Nora said. "And I will buy a strip of ground beside the wall where shade holds a bench in summer." "And what of the letter?" Aunt Ada asked, quiet. "The one against your heart." Nora touched the place above her stays, where the folded paper waited like a stern aunt of its own. "Not yet," she said. "I will not open a thing that changes the shape of the hall before I have built a place for the names to be safe." Aunt Ada nodded, satisfied and worried in equal measure, as all good women are when they have taught a girl to tie her own ribbon and watch her walk into weather. Later, Nora went to the parish school while the children were still chasing noise and one another. Mrs. Hallam stepped from the door with chalk dust like a blessing on her sleeves. She was plain and precise, and had eyes that could find the boy who throws what he should not even when he hides underneath his own good intentions. "Nora Whitlow," Mrs. Hallam said, "you look as if you have brought either trouble or repair." "Repair," Nora said. "I have money for coal, for readers, for pencils, and I will purchase, if you consent, the strip of ground there." She pointed to the narrow wedge where the wall gave way to nothing special. "For a garden and a bench and one day a shelf with glass to keep rain off the books." Mrs. Hallam did not waste time being surprised. "Space is a kind of hope," she said, as if the sentence had been waiting for its moment. "It lets children imagine themselves taller." She called the churchwarden and the man who kept the parish keys, and between them, with the treasurer's ledger and a careful witness, they drew up a paper. Nora paid a fair price in sovereigns that clinked less joyfully than one might wish and more seriously than one might expect. The paper took the Wycliffe crest because the ground had forgotten how not to. The impression sat at the bottom of the deed like a promise it had not yet learned to keep. "Keep the original," Mrs. Hallam said, surprising Nora. "The parish does not mind a copy when the original can be held by hands that will not mislay it." Nora folded the deed as if it might bruise and slipped it into the ribbon with her receipts. "You will have coal by week's end," she said, "and readers, and a clock." "Bring the clock yourself," Mrs. Hallam said. "We will set it together, and then no one can scold a child for a late lesson when the fault lies with the sun." When Nora left the school, the afternoon had begun to tilt, and the shadows under hedges took on their late-day patience. She walked back toward the cottage with a gait that was tired and full, as one who has spent the right kind of money. In the village lane, Hobbs passed with his hat tilted bravely and his eyes counting windows. He tipped the hat as if he owned politeness and rented it to others by the hour. Nora did not slow. He turned to watch, and then turned away under the knowledge that some women are not slowed by watching. At the edge of the estate, a boy from the stables, Sanderson's lad, trotted past with a string of harness over his shoulder. He raised a hand. Nora raised hers in reply and kept on. The world had begun to look as it always had, and at the same time, not at all. She reached Aunt Ida's door and found the house quiet, the afternoon sun fitting itself into the room, the way a cat fits into a basket that appears too small until occupied. She knelt to set the receipts on the low shelf where Aunt Ida kept things that mattered. Marriage lines, a lock of hair, a ribbon too faded for use but not yet surrendered. When she rose, Something crackled under her palm on the worn floorboard. A scrap of parchment lay just inside the threshold, folded twice. The edges creased as if the person who had pushed it under the door did not want to push too hard. Nora picked it up. It weighed nearly nothing. She opened it and recognized the careful hand that avoids flourish because it does not need it. And beneath the words a set of initials that changed the air in the room. Meet me by the east gate at dusk, J.W. The east gate held the last of the light, as if it had cupped evening in its stone palm. Nora stood with her shawl folded over her arm, the ribbon of receipts tucked safe beneath. She had chosen the plainest of her dresses and the soundest of her shoes, not because she meant to be small, but because she meant to be steady. He came without attendance, which told her something. James Wycliffe's boots made no lordly noise on the gravel. He stopped at a modest distance, not so near as to crowd, not so far as to seem ceremonial. A rook called from the trees and made their paws feel like part of the world. "Miss Whitlow," he said, "thank you for coming." "I come when asked," Nora answered, careful with the truth, "and when I have reason." He looked at her shawl, then at her face. "You have made use of the weak." It was not a question. He had the tone of a man who has watched without believing observations give him ownership. She slipped the ribboned bundle of papers free. "Receipts," she said, "for arrears redeemed, signatures, the estate seal where they would not press it until pressed." She did not say proud. She did not say afraid. She held them out, not to hand over, but to let him see the weight of their small certainties. He did not reach. He looked, and his mouth did that small, softened thing again. "You understand proof," he said quietly. "Most people spend to be seen. You spend to be sure." "I have seen how seeing works in rooms like yours," she said. "It is not the same as knowing." A corner of his eye creased. "You ask for the right ink." He glanced toward the darkening lane. "I will not pretend your work has gone unnoticed. There are those who would prefer a test to produce only a party story." "Then they should have set out sugared almonds and kept their hands out of other people's pockets," she said. He did not laugh, but his posture changed, as if something inside him liked this plainness better than flattery. "If you need for your work to pass unmolested," he said, "ask at the stables for Sanderson. Tell him I have given him your name. He will carry messages to me. He will carry requests for protection where a seal will be listened to even when a woman's voice will not." Nora weighed this. "Protection is a coin," she said. "It spends both ways. I will accept it where it pays a widow's rent and nowhere else." "Exactly there," he said. "And if irregularities in estate practice present themselves," he paused as if measuring his own right to ask. "If ledgers hold what they should not, bring the fact of it, not the rumor. I cannot defend what I do not see." "There is a line," Nora said, "between what belongs to a house and what belongs to the parish. If it has been crossed, the paper will show it." She did not speak of letters under silk, or of initials clinging to margins like weeds at a river's edge. He nodded once, as one marks a pact. "You have a steadier hand than many men I know," he said. "It is not my habit to eavesdrop, Miss Whitlow, but for the rest of this week I will be very poor company indeed. I will be everywhere that men make excuses in ink." "Then we will meet again in a room where paper is more important than chandeliers," she said. He stepped back, a courtly signal that the conversation ended where it should. "Thank you," he said again, the simpler kind of thanks that does not lay traps. "And congratulations, Mrs. Hallam tells me. The parish has a new slice of ground." "She tells you quickly," Nora said, startled. "Yes, a bench will stand there. And a shelf," he smiled, brief and real, perhaps more than one. When he had gone, Nora stood with the receipts in her hands and let the evening decide whether to be warm or cool. It chose cool. She wrapped the papers again and walked toward the school. There was light still in the windows. Mrs. Hallam's figure moved behind the glass, tidying the day into tomorrow. Nora rapped and was admitted at once. The room smelled faintly of chalk and cedar shavings, as if learning had a scent and wished to be remembered for it. The children were gone. The small chairs waited with the patience of furniture. "I have arranged the coal," Nora said, business in her voice so her heart would not rush ahead. "Delivery tomorrow. The readers will arrive by week's end, and I have found a clock that neither lies nor runs to please." "Bring it yourself," Mrs. Hallam said. We will wind it together so none of the gentlemen can pretend time behaves for them differently." She wiped her hands and looked toward the narrow strip beyond the window. "Imagine a row of beans there, and a small tree, perhaps." "A tree," Nora agreed, "for weddings and for shadows after running. I will ask the churchwarden to suggest a hardy sort, something that knows wind." They walked outside to where the grass wore thin, where boys ran their races. The wall at the edge of the plot held evening's coolness. Nora touched it, palm flat. The stone had accumulated years and held them without fuss. "You did not come merely to speak of deliveries," Mrs. Hallam observed. "No," Nora said. "The prince offered me a means to reach him without passing through rooms where laughter does its tricks. I thought you should know. If you see men with seals making mischief, you may send for Sanderson by name." Mrs. Hallam's brows rose. "He has installed you as a small magistrate," she said. "Wise. No one else is paying attention to the right cracks in the floorboards." She tapped the deed in Nora's ribboned bundle. "Keep that always on your person. Men who do not mind stealing bread will steal paper more easily." "I keep it above my heart," Nora said, and said no more. On the road back, she stopped at the coal yard to confirm the order and to make sure the boy with the cart knew that the school took precedence over drawing rooms this week. He nodded vigorously, sensing a secret authority and ready to be proud of obeying it. She purchased primers at the bookseller's, second-hand but tidy, their covers only lightly scuffed by other children's hands. She walked home with the gold, much less than it had been, and the papers more. That same evening, James's horse took him to York by a route that knew his pace. He chose no herald. He chose no plume. He found Mr. Hobbs at his usual desk, where ink and greed made their quiet bargain. "Good evening, Mr. Hobbs," James said, and a steward's name at the door made people sit up, but a prince's voice in a small office made them forget how to be comfortable. Hobbs's mouth seized up into a smile not made for this circumstance. "Highness," he said, scraping his chair back so quickly it apologized for him. "An honor rare as a comet." James did not waste the courtesies. "I have come about extraordinary collections," he said. He set his gloved hand lightly on the ledger, as if it were a dog that might bite if handled, but might also stay if called. "You will explain to me, in short words, your practice under that heading for the last 2 years." Hobbs's eyes went to the window, the floor, the past. "The late Duke," he began, then stopped, which was the first honest thing he had done all day. "Sir, there were deficits in the estate accounts. The late Duke instructed that arrears be found, as it were, where they could be found, and collected promptly, with the understanding that the parish would bear the weight like an ox for a season and be repaid when ships came in, or rents righted, or other excuses presented themselves," James finished, his voice even and exceedingly calm. "Under whose seal?" "The estate's, Highness," Hobbs said, his voice riding the edge between certainty and hope. "I do not touch that seal without orders." "And those orders?" James asked, his gloved finger tapping the ledger's margin where he knew they would sit. "Were initialed." "How?" Hobbs swallowed. "H.R.," he said. The letters came out of his mouth like a confession of an affair with a very dull woman. "His Royal—" "I know what they mean," James said. He lifted the cover and turned a page, then another. Column after column of names he would have rather met at harvest suppers looked up at him as if to ask whether he knew them. "And this practice continues," Hobbs managed a shrug that wished to be a salute. "The late Duke enjoyed efficiency," he said, and then corrected himself in a hurry. "Valued it, I should say." James looked at him and saw a man who had made himself useful to power by borrowing its language without stealing its tone. "You will from this hour suspend any collection under the extraordinary heading. You will accept payments only as tendered by those willing and able. You will not, under any pretext, threaten removal to the county hold to hasten your purse." Hobbs's face performed a small moral argument and decided it was prudent to agree. "Highness," he said, "if the estate will so order." "I have so ordered," James said. He closed the ledger with a care that made it clear it was not an end, only a pause. "And you will tomorrow bring to Wycliffe Hall your receipts for the last year's extraordinary collections. All of them." "Of course," Hobbs said, nodding in a way that meant perhaps, unless he found a way not to. "At once." "Before noon," James said, and Hobbs's nod became the nod of a man who did not wish to discover what afternoon looked like in this prince's company. As James mounted, he glanced along the lane and saw for an instant a familiar figure at the far end. Plain dress, neat posture, ribbon dark against hair. He did not lift a hand. The city swallowed moments like that and returned the appetite. Night at Wycliffe wore quieter shoes than the day. The study's lamplight made a golden raft in a sea of polish and restraint. James sat at his desk with 2 documents before him, a letter from a London cousin full of nothing, and a memorandum from his steward marked private, whose seal he had not yet broken. He set the cousin aside, as one moves a plate that never held food, and reached for the memorandum. Before he could crack the wax, footsteps moved in the corridor with the confidence of a man who believes doors love him. The knob turned without a knock. Mr. Calvert entered in a coat that had never known a stain, his hair orderly as a sermon. "Highness," he said, bowing exactly as long as propriety required and as little longer as would be noticed. "I hope to find you. There is a matter that must be put plain between us." James leaned back, keeping the desk between them, as though it were a map showing 2 armies. "Mr. Calvert." Calvert did not sit. He preferred to stand and use height the way other men use coins. He placed a folded paper on the desk between James's hand and the lamp. The wax seal on it bore the late Duke's signet. "The house is under your charge now," he began. "It is my duty to spare you errors of kindness that would cost us dearer than cruelty." "Plainly," James said. Calvert's smile was patient and cold. "Dismiss the maid, or the house will bleed." Tea laid itself out like an apology for the morning. The long table gleamed, the porcelain laughed softly at its own patterns, and the cakes attempted to look innocent. Servants moved along the edges, polished and precise as if they too had been set out on saucers. Nora carried a dish of lemon slices to the sideboard and kept to the shadow of a tall urn. Her ribbon lay smooth against her nape. Her receipts were tied beneath her shawl, a confidential weight. She reminded herself to swallow and breathe between swallows. Lady Arabella came in first, trailing a pleasant rumour. Diamonds winked at her throat, arranged in a neat river that had clearly found its channel since yesterday. She lifted her chin as one lifts a glass. "A small acquisition," she said, putting her gloves onto a chair back as if the chair deserved to be decorated. "One should do something for the nation's jewellers when times are so inconstant." "Oh, indeed," cooed Miss Lydia, whose hair had been coaxed into a cloud that promised rainbows. "And so tasteful." Lady Honoria floated like a swan who had practiced. Her silk whispered of Paris without needing to speak French. "It is not the price that matters," she said, smiling as if she believed herself generous, "but the message. We must show the world it is still proper to be proper." Lady Margaret followed with economy. Her gloves were the colour of bone and fit as if her hands had grown inside them. "Bloodlines," she remarked, not to anyone in particular. "One cannot waste opportunities to secure the best. There is a stallion in Surrey whose grandsire, well, one must think in generations." She smiled a narrow smile that might have been mistaken for contentment by someone who liked narrow things. Prince James entered last, not late, simply as if his time were a river and his feet were its banks. He greeted the circle with calm evenness and took the chair at the head of the arrangement without announcing that he had done so. Mr. Calvert stood at his shoulder for a breath too long, then drifted to the side like a man who prefers to be behind the curtains, where strings can be pulled without being seen. "My thanks for indulging yesterday's whim," James said. "I hope today will indulge something sturdier." Glances were exchanged. Fans half opened and closed like nervous mouths. "Perhaps," Lady Arabella offered, "we may share our progress, since those below stairs are all afire with curiosity." She laughed as if curiosity were a small domestic pet that ought not to be encouraged to jump. "Do," James said, his tone unhurried. "Begin where you please." Lady Arabella touched the diamonds at her throat, letting them catch the light, as if light were a friend she had cultivated. "I chose permanence," she said, "a rivière. It will pass to my daughter, and hers and hers. Beauty educates the eye. It obliges one to behave better." Lady Honoria accepted a cup and did not drink from it. "Silk," she said, "taffeta. Muslin of a weave that cannot be had from our own looms, more's the pity. Fashion is the language of respect. If we do not speak it, who will?" She smiled toward James with the affection a cat gives a man who knows how to open doors. Miss Lydia sat forward, eager. "A phaeton," she confessed, cheeks pinking. "With scarlet wheels. Papa says it is dangerous to drive with such, but he smiled when he said it, so I shall manage." Lady Margaret lifted one finger, trimmed and indifferent. "A stallion," she said. "Strong bone, clear eye, 2 broodmares secured with him. It does not glitter, but it will pay for itself and more. One cannot be sentimental about such matters." "A sound investment," murmured someone behind a teapot. Eyes slid, almost a single creature's eyes, toward the edge of the room where a maid stood with dignity and a shawl that had learned to hide a life. Nora stepped forward because the space had asked her to, and because to refuse would be to let someone else fill it with a story that was not hers. "Miss Whitlow," James said, and the room held its breath as if listening would increase its value. "If you care to share." She untied the ribbon with slow fingers and did not rush because rushing makes people believe they have seen a stumble even when they have not. She laid the stack of papers on the side table and kept her hand on them a moment, a mother's palm over a child's back. "I chose to buy ends," she said, "of things that ought to have ended before they began." She lifted the first receipt. "Mrs. Peck, £2.06, arrears discharged." She turned it so the seal caught the light. The red wax made its small, obedient blaze. "Samuel Craddock, £1.09, turn. Corporal Ames, 4 and 2, turn. Mrs. Ellery, rent arrears, settled. The widow Barnes, coal for winter paid in advance." Turn, turning proof into a kind of music. A hush made itself. It was not reverent. It was startled. It was the hush of a theatre audience discovering that the player they thought was comic has chosen to be true instead. Lady Honoria's smile tilted into something sharper. "Charity is charming from a parish committee," she said. "From a maid in a grand room, it looks rather like spectacle." Nora felt the old sting rise and did not give it her face. "This is not charity," she said, calm. "It is correction. Paper has been used to harm those who cannot lift it. I have used paper to carry them instead." A little flicker touched James's features and was gone. He set down his cup, untouched. "And to what end?" he asked, his voice catching the word and holding it up for fairness. "The question we must ask, all of us." "To the end that names remain names," Nora said, "and are not walked across like floors." She placed one more paper on the stack, different from the others. "I have also purchased a narrow strip of land beside the parish school, for a bench and a shelf and, in time, a small library. The deed bears the estate crest as it must. I have kept the original." Lady Arabella's fan stilled mid-wave. "A school," she said, as if the word had teeth and she had not expected it. Lady Margaret considered the deed with a breeder's eye, as if trying to see whether it had good shoulders. "Land improves with use," she said, neutral, which for her was nearly kind. Miss Lydia stared, admiration plain and unlearned. "A bench," she whispered, almost to herself, as if trying on the idea of children resting. Honoria's voice returned to its preferred temperature. "And what of propriety?" she asked. "Of asking permission before a servant acts as if she were a steward?" James leaned back, not far, just enough to change the air. "Lady Honoria," he said, his tone still pleasant, "to what end do yards of silk serve beyond the wearer?" Colour touched Honoria's cheek with an unwelcome honesty. "They serve the eye," she said, crisp. "They serve civility." "And the diamonds?" he asked Arabella, as if they had all the afternoon to practice truth. "They teach taste," she said, and though she was clever, even she could hear how thin the answer sounded, in company with receipts that whispered names. James nodded once, as if he had seen a bird he wanted to remember later. "My experiment was not to embarrass," he said softly. "It was to see where gold goes when no one tells it where to go." A murmur moved, unsatisfied and unwilling to show it. Cups settled. Spoons chimed the smallest argument against porcelain. After tea, the room emptied with grace and speed. Even laughter shuffles off when it has not won. Nora gathered her receipts and retied the ribbon, aware of eyes that had not learned how to stop measuring. In the side corridor, where a long mirror extended everyone by a foot, Mr. Calvert stepped from a pocket of shadow, with his smile arranged. He did not touch her. He shaped the space in front of her to require a decision. "Miss Whitlow," he murmured. "A moment. You have had a most enterprising week." "I have had a week given," she said. "I have spent it." "Have you?" His glance dropped to the ribbon, then rose. He held out an envelope heavy enough to announce itself. There are ways to tidy this if you feel you have overreached. Return your receipts. Say you miscounted. The prince's test will proceed without complications. You will be compensated well beyond any coal or primers. Her hand did not move toward the envelope. Compensated, she repeated, tasting the lie. For your trouble, he said, and your discretion. The last word came out sweet and sick at once. Nora considered the corridor, the mirror, the way the afternoon light flattened men into forms. She did not raise her voice. She did not need it. She set her bundle of receipts on a small table, and from her skirt pocket she lifted a small oval shape that had warmed against her through the day. She placed it on the polished wood between them. Calvert's eyes went to it and then fixed there, as if pulled by a wire. The locket's engraved M caught the pale light and made it precise. The faint impression of the crest on the back was a whisper that could become a shout. "Where did you get that?" he said. His voice had shed its civility like an old coat and stood in its shirt sleeves. "In a shop that buys what men pawn when they are too proud to ask for help," Nora said. "It came with a pawn ticket and a paper." Calvert's face closed. He reached out as if to cover the locket and stopped himself in time to save appearances. "That," he said, steadying his tone, "is family property." "It was," she said. "Then it became a proof. Then it became for sale. Now it is mine." "Dangerous things," he said softly. "Misunderstandings, old trinkets, broken seals." "It is not broken," she said. "It is opened, and there is a letter inside with the crest and the hand that has been busy in ledgers. A letter that belongs to the truth. Rumor likes a staircase. It runs down quick and flutters up again, catching skirts as it goes." By nightfall, Nora felt it move through the hall like a draft that had learned to speak. She was seen in the steward's corridor, a lady's maid murmured as she braided her mistress's hair, peering at books she cannot read. "Ink stains on her fingers," another said, as if ink itself were a theft. "A girl who likes paper is a girl who will steal it." The men had their version, tidier and sharper. "Overreaching," said a viscount with teeth too white for truth. "A prince's indulgence makes servants forget doors." Nora could not stop ears. She could walk past them as she had walked past hedges with thorns. She kept to work where work could cover her, and to purpose where purpose could defend her. She slept at Aunt Ida's when she could, where walls knew her breathing. Early the next morning in the yard, Sanderson's lad found her with a note folded like a secret that had been told reluctantly. "From Mr. Sanderson," he said, proud to have a part in a world that might need him. "He says to tell you the prince has been asking questions that do not make men comfortable." She read the neat hand with relief that felt like a small, warm stone in her palm. "Bring any papers you cannot afford to lose to Mrs. Hallam. Keep nothing in your room but what you would read aloud at dinner." She did as told. Before breakfast, she tied the ribbon stack beneath her shawl and walked straight to the school, while the hall was still smelling of hot water and intention. Mrs. Hallam opened the door wide at the first knock, as if she had dreamed this errand and set tea to boiling inside it. "I will keep them," she said, when Nora had untied the ribbon and laid the receipts and the deed on the table beside a slate and a line of copybooks. "Not in my desk. Not under the floorboard everyone knows about. We will be unromantic." She took a small tin from a shelf labeled blunt pencils and lifted the lid. Inside, pencils lay like spent arrows. She slid the papers beneath them, snug and unremarkable. "If a man wants to seize blunt pencils, let him." Nora laughed, a short breath that took some weight with it. "And the deed," she said, touching the crisp edge as if it might be frightened. "The deed you keep," Mrs. Hallam said, tapping Nora's bodice, where the locket's letter also lay, "close to where your heart refuses stupidity." On her way back, Nora passed two maids in the lane sharing breath and gossip. They fell silent when she drew near, then lifted their chins as if they had been discussing geography. The word thief shivered in the air, and did not find a mouth brave enough to hold it. She kept walking. By mid-morning, as she was rinsing a jug at the pump, Mary came running with cheeks bright from either haste or temper, and hand shielding her mouth. "Nora," she said, but quiet, fumbling to fit urgency into decency. "They say Mr. Calvert has sent to the magistrate for a seizure, papers belonging to the house. Not the big ledgers, those are too fat to move without noise, but little ones that can vanish like mice." Nora dried the jug deliberately, the way one writes a name slowly when someone is looking. Belonging, she said. Useful word. It puts a leash on things willing to run. Mary glanced around. They will come, she whispered, urgent. Here, to your room, to the cottage. They will say the seal makes every paper theirs to pocket. She swallowed. Nora, and stopped because there are not words for fearing for someone and respecting her at once. Thank you, Nora said. Do not fret. If they take what is mine to copy, they will not take what is ours to keep. She carried the emptiness in her arms as if it were full of something she would not spill. In the corridor outside the steward's office, the sunlight was too clean for the business it lit. Nora intended to walk past. She did not because James stepped out from a side door in that unannounced way he had. He looked almost surprised to find his own feet had carried him through trouble. Miss Whitlow, he said gently, as if the corridor itself might resent kind speaking. A word, if you will. She stopped at once. Highness, Mr. Calvert has petitioned the magistrate, he said, not wasting her time, to secure any papers belonging to Wycliffe that may have found their way into the hands of the... He paused, and the word he did not like had to be honored by being avoided. Of those without charge to hold them, papers have found their way, Nora said, because they were lost from where they ought to have been kept. He held her gaze with that steadiness she had begun to recognize as the closest thing a prince could do to an apology. I have sent to the magistrate as well, he said, requesting an accounting to be done here, not by seizure in the dark. There will be witnesses when ledgers open. He glanced toward the steward's door. No more private rooms for this matter. Relief and fear argued in Nora. Relief said, good. Fear said, you bring light. It will show everything. She nodded. Then I will stand where the light is. Do, he said. And, Miss Whitlow, if any officer comes to you for any paper, you will refer him to me. You will not surrender a ribbon, a receipt, a scrap without my seal and your witness. My witness, she repeated. Mrs. Hallam, he said, and the choice made a small smile prick her face. And, if you like, Sanderson, we will make a habit of doing difficult things properly. He stepped aside so she could pass without feeling moved. She went to the scullery to wash hands that trembled only when no one watched. She told Aunt Ida by way of a nod and a look when they crossed in the yard, and that look said, keep your own papers where no man would look for them, inside the lid of the flour tin, beneath the folded cloth for Sunday. The day stretched long and taut. By afternoon, the drawing-room filled with visiting gentlemen who smelled of starch and money, and who acted as if they were not visiting at all, merely owning the space temporarily. Words like impropriety and unfortunate circulated in low tones that wished to be mistaken for care. In the corner, Lady Honoria made sympathetic shapes with her mouth for an audience that would repeat them as arguments later. It is unseemly, she said, as if that ended a debate. Servants and ledgers, there are lines. More than one man with influence approached James with the confidence of a chess player, sure he had seen the board. Put a neat end to it, one said. Disqualify the girl. Say the test was misunderstood. There are ways to praise her heart and reprimand her method that will satisfy the town. James listened and did not agree. There is a difference, he said evenly, between misunderstanding and discovering something uncomfortable. When pressed, he added, we will not use a compliment as a broom. Mr. Calvert kept his expression neutral and his hands quiet. He murmured to a magistrate's clerk in the vestibule and saw a note carried out under an unremarkable seal, the sort that travels without announcing itself and works twice as hard because of it. By evening, the whispers had grown grand enough to be called talk. Nora walked through them on her way to the school, carrying nothing visible, holding everything necessary. Mrs. Hallam kept the door unlatched. They will try tonight, Mrs. Hallam said without preface, or they will try at dawn, which is the same thing for men who like to surprise. Dawn, Nora said. Surprises are cheaper then. Sit, Mrs. Hallam said. We will not let fear make us pace holes in the floor. She poured tea and set it where hands could find it. You will sleep in the back room. If Boots come, we will have a discussion at this table with witnesses. I have sent for the churchwarden. He snores like a mill, but his pen is honest. Nora lay down on the narrow cot and tried not to listen for dawn. Sleep came the way everything had come this week, only when asked clearly. She woke once in the deep middle, when even dogs forget their work, and felt for the locket through the cloth, its small, hard comfort. She did not open the letter inside. Not yet. Paper can be a flood if one pulls the wrong stone. Near morning, when the dark has begun to lose its confidence and the birds have not yet remembered their duties, Nora sat at the table with Mrs. Hallam and the churchwarden and took the locket up. She slid a fingernail beneath the silk lining and lifted the brittle folded shape. The seal impression had cracked and flaked long ago. The hand that had written the address had written in a firm, spare style, "To my wife, Margaret." She did not read on. Her heart beat against the words, as if it could push them back into the paper. She placed the letter on the table, touched it with 2 fingers, and then slid it beneath her palm. "Keep it closed," Mrs. Hallam advised softly, seeing the edges of it without needing to see the lines. "Let it open when the room is full enough to bear it." Nora nodded. Yes. She slid the letter back into the locket's cavity and pressed the silk down. The little hinge clicked, homely and certain. She and Mrs. Hallam reviewed the receipts in the tin, named them as one name's children one last time before leaving them with a new schoolmaster. The churchwarden yawned into his sleeve and apologized to the lord and the ladies, not necessarily in that order. They heard the boots before they saw the men. Boots have a different sound when they are coming to collect, as if the leather has agreed to be stern. The schoolroom's window showed only a small square of the lane, but it was enough to catch the shape of hats and the gleam of buttons in a row. Mrs. Hallam rose and straightened her sleeves, the way a general might settle his coat before battle. "We are ready," she said, and put the blunt pencils tin squarely in the middle of the table, like an unassuming declaration. The door rattled under a knuckle that did not believe in asking. The constable entered without waiting for hello, with Mr. Calvert just behind, tidy as ever, and 2 more men who liked the look of their own authority. The constable held a paper with a ribbon and a seal that did not improve the words upon it. "By order of the magistrate," he began, enjoying the taste of each syllable, "we are come to collect any papers, ledgers, receipts, or other documents belonging to Wycliffe Estate presently in the hands of—" he glanced at the paper, as if it might help him pronounce, "Miss Nora Whitlow, or her associates." Nora stood. Fear did not recede. It made a home and sat down. She lifted her chin the way Aunt Ida did when the wind tried to take the washing. "You will take nothing from this room," she said, her voice steady as chalk. "Not without the prince present and our witnesses named." She gestured to Mrs. Hallam, to the churchwarden, whose pen was already out, like a sword of a sort. "You will conduct your business at Wycliffe Hall, where the ledgers began and where they will be read." Calvert's smile made a show of regret. "Miss Whitlow misunderstands," he said smoothly. "The prince appreciates zeal, but household property must be secured before it is misplaced by good intentions." "The prince," Nora said, "has sent word that any accounting will be done in open room." She looked to the constable. "And he has asked that you bring the ledgers to the hall before noon." She did not mention Hobbs, or the night's visit, or how the word noon had been a line a man could slice his reputation on. The constable shifted, uncertain. Men who like orders do not like being handed 2 that do not match. Calvert's hand twitched. He masked it by adjusting a cuff. "We will go to the hall," Mrs. Hallam said briskly, as if arranging a school outing. "Together. You ahead with your paper, we behind with ours. The churchwarden will note the condition of each sheet as it travels." The constable looked relieved by the shape of a plan that could be walked. Calvert did not. He considered the tin of blunt pencils and saw nothing as important as a tin of blunt pencils. "Very well," he said. "We will do this in rooms that know how to hold a conversation." He turned, and the men turned with him in that obedient way authority has when it travels in boots. They crossed the green with the morning rising, villagers stepping aside to let the little procession through. Windows filled with faces trying to be curtains. Nora carried the shawl wrapped tight around nothing they could see and everything that mattered. The locket lay cold and certain against her skin. At Wycliffe Hall, the great doors opened with ceremony they had not earned. The marble took the sound of boots and made it grand against its will. The constable cleared his throat as they entered, as if announcing the day to the house itself. Boots echoed on marble as doors opened. They were led to the small room just off the ballroom, the one that never had a name of its own but knew every word spoken beside it. A heavy table stood at the center. Ledgers lay upon it like sleeping beasts, thick and sure of their size. A lamp had been set, though it was morning, as if truth wished for its own light. James was already there. He did not sit. He had his hands on the table's edge, palms down, the way a man holds steady what others might rock. He nodded to Mrs. Hallam and the churchwarden, and to the constable who preferred paper to people. He did not nod to Calvert. He did not need to. "Thank you for coming," he said to Nora, and the words were plain enough to be carried without dropping. "We will do this with witnesses." Calvert smiled as if politeness were a coin he knew how to trade. "Highness, there is no question we cannot answer in quiet." "There are many," James said. "We will answer none that way." The constable cleared his throat and held up the magistrate's order. "By authority," he began. "Lay it down," Mrs. Hallam said, not unkindly. "We will read it when we have finished reading the things that caused it." She placed the tin of blunt pencils on the table like a joke that had decided to be useful. Hobbs shuffled in behind, having been snatched by the constable on the way from his own nest. He looked smaller without his desk. He avoided Nora's eyes and found the wall, which did not mind being stared at. James lifted the top ledger, turned it, and placed it open, so the column headings faced the room, not the desk. Nora felt gratitude and fear tighten the same thread in her chest. She moved closer, close enough to see the ink's gloss where it had been laid down with care and not conscience. "Arrears, parish collections, extraordinary," James read, as if the words might be made less careless by being pronounced properly. "Names, sums, dates, and here." He indicated the bottom margin. 2 letters sat like a pair of sharp, neat footprints. Initials, HR. Calvert's tone was ready. His royal— "Save us the explanation," Mrs. Hallam said crisply. "We can read as well as you can pretend not to blush." James did not look at Calvert. He turned a page. "Disposition," he read. "Reallocation to estate accounts, noted as temporary." He tapped the word temporary with one finger, as if testing whether it would hold a man's weight. "Mr. Hobbs." Hobbs started, then stepped forward 2 inches, the way a man approaches a pond he knows to be cold. "Highness, you have collected under this heading," James said, "at speed, with threat of transfer to the county hold to encourage promptness." Hobbs's mouth tried 3 shapes and chose the least dangerous. "Under direction of the late Duke, sir. With the steward's oversight, I'm a small man. I carry messages and money. I do not make policy." "You make choices," Mrs. Hallam said. "Small ones, which is how big harms are done." The churchwarden dipped his pen and wrote, lips moving as they recorded words that would be exactly the same when someone else read them. Nora felt the locket against her skin, as if it had grown heavier in the room's heat. She thought of the letter's first line, "To my wife, Margaret." She thought of the way the pawn ticket had been rolled tight, ashamed of being company to confession. She stepped forward and laid the locket on the table beside the ledger. Calvert's gaze snapped to it, then away as if the sight burned. "Family property," he said, the words automatic, like a soldier's drill. "It was," Nora said. She did not raise her voice. The room came nearer to hear her. "Then it was pawned to quiet a creditor. Then it was forgotten. Then it was found by a woman with ink on her fingers." She lifted the silk lining with the small nail knife Mrs. Hallam had placed near the tin without fanfare. She eased the folded paper free and set it beside the locket, careful as if placing a child. James did not reach to seize. He looked to Nora first. "May I?" he asked. It was a small thing to ask permission in a house where permission usually moved in one direction only. It moved the air around Nora as surely as a breeze lifts a curtain. "Yes," she said, "with all of us present." He unfolded the letter with the care a man uses when he is about to undo himself on purpose. The seal's crumbly ghost flaked onto the table. He read the first line aloud because there is mercy in saying a wound in the same voice one uses for breakfast. "To my wife Margaret," he read, "I have, for a season, reallocated parish funds to steady the estate's books. Hobbs will collect arrears under the title Extraordinary. Calvert will see it done with discretion." He paused. The pen strokes marched on. "When our situation rights with the next shipments, I will make the parish whole. Until then, I have pawned your locket to satisfy a creditor who will not be told to wait." Silence laid itself over the room and had weight. Nora heard it like a bell rung underwater. Calvert's mouth flattened. "A private letter," he said, attempting disdain and finding only thinness. "Written in a moment of strain, men say many things to their wives that do not bear the weight of policy." "They bear the weight of intent," James said. He did not blink. He read farther, jaw set. "We do what we must to maintain appearance," the hand had continued. "The village will survive a season or two without indulgence." "Indulgence," Mrs. Hallam repeated, and there was acid in the word. James folded the paper again once as if he could not bear its face and set it down with the crest upward. He did not look at Nora. He looked at the ledger and at Hobbs and at Calvert and at his own hands, which had been taught to sign orders and open doors and never tremble. "The name I bear will not bear this," he said quietly. "Not in the dark. Not with the house intact and the village paying the thatch." Calvert moved a fraction, enough to be seen and deny it. "Highness, you risk collapsing what your father preserved. He valued efficiency. He held the line. If you parade these private difficulties, the house will bleed in public." "The house is not a god," James said. "It is a roof. If its keystone is rotten, we replace it while standing under it, or we do not deserve rooms." Hobbs swallowed as if he had followed a mouthful of pride with vinegar. "If repayments are ordered, the estate must—" He stopped, seeing that the estate was a man in a coat in front of him, not an invisible patron behind. "We will," James said. The "we" was not the royal habit. It was a decision to be surrounded by other people. "Every shilling taken under extraordinary will be returned with interest. The ledger will be copied in full and deposited with the magistrate. Parish collections will resume under ordinary headings only. Mr. Hobbs, you will cease threats of transfer. If you do not, I will recommend your removal." Hobbs nodded, quick, a little grateful to be told what to do again. James turned to Nora. The room watched the turn as if it might be indecorous and found it was not. "You have in this week given back faces to numbers," he said simply. "You have made receipts into bridges. You will be protected in this work." Protection reaches a woman as a promise and a trap. Nora felt both and saw her way between them. "Protect the receipts," she said. "Protect the names. I will be all right." "I mean to protect the habit of correction," he said. "Through you, and because of you." Mrs. Hallam, who did not cry over the right things, blinked hard and pretended to inspect the tin. The churchwarden cleared his throat because he was not sure what to do with the damp behind his eyes. Calvert's face did not move. His mind shuffled cards faster. "Highness," he said with a patience tone that had served him with weaker men, "allow me to remind you of the parties assembled tonight. The town waits for your declaration regarding the test. There will be talk of what constitutes proper use of gold." "There has been talk since we fit our first door," James said. "Let us give it a better subject." "Then let me suggest prudence," Calvert pressed. "Praise the girl's heart. Do not make an enemy of the dead. Quietly disqualify her for improper handling of household property. Call it a misapprehension, a misstep." His smile offered Nora a handkerchief he would hold for her while she dried her face. Nora met his eyes and saw only corridors. She lifted the locket and placed it back over the letter, closing it with that small home sound. She slid it toward James. "This belongs to a memory, not to a thief," she said. "I do not care whether it lives in my pocket or on a shelf, so long as it stands next to the ledger in daylight." James set his palm over the locket, not to own it, but to keep it from sliding in the jostle of principle. "It will," he said. He looked at the constable. "No document leaves this room without my seal and the names of these witnesses upon it. Not one." He looked at Nora again and spoke the only kind of vow he could make in a room crowded with ears. "If there is a corner you cannot stand in safely, you will send for me and I will stand there instead." A strange warmth ran through her with the steadiness of tea poured properly. It did not flutter. It located itself in her chest and declared it would remain a while. She inclined her head once, a ceremony no school had taught her. Mrs. Hallam put the tin's lid back with a satisfied snick. "Good. Then we are agreed. Now, before the ink dries wrong, let us have Mr. Hobbs produce his receipts for the year as requested." Hobbs, who had hoped to escape that request by being useful in other ways, sighed and produced a packet tied with twine. The papers were soft from much touching. The churchwarden sorted them, throat murmuring little numbers as prayers. Nora watched the seals wink in the lamplight and felt each one as a tile laid back into a floor that had buckled. In the hallway beyond, the orchestra struck a few notes, the way a ship tests its rigging before setting out. Afternoon had slid toward evening while they had stood in a room where daylight and lamplight negotiated. The sound reached them like a message folded under a door. Calvert bowed, and the bow had more bend than his spine liked. "Very well, Highness," he said. "If you mean to hold court in honesty, then let us go where court is held." He gestured to the wide doorway that led toward the glittering hall, where the banquet for the test had begun, and all York had assembled to be pleased. The chandeliers did what they always did, pretended the night was tamed. Silver shone as if it had never known hunger. The orchestra held its bow a moment too long, then let a bright run of notes test the edges of the room. Faces turned toward the dais where James stood, every gaze oiled with expectation. Nora stood at the side as one stands near the sea, close enough to feel the pull, far enough not to drown. The ribbon of receipts lay warm beneath her shawl. The locket rested against her skin, a small, cool truth. Aunt Ada had taken a place near the door, where women stand when they wish to be first to carry news home. Mrs. Hallam and the churchwarden waited near the antechamber, the tin of blunt pencils unlikely and important. Mr. Calvert arranged himself where influence could find him by mistake, and be grateful. Lady Arabella, Lady Honoria, Miss Lydia, and Lady Margaret held their poise like porcelain figures, but porcelain can crack with a sound too fine to hear. James raised a hand, and the notes from the violins fell like petals. "Friends," he said, and the word reached those not used to being called that. "We meet again at the end of a week begun with an experiment." A light laugh rippled, recalling the audacity. It faded when his voice did not join it. "I asked where gold would go when it was given liberty," he continued. "In the last hours I have learned where it went when it was not." A stir. Calvert's mouth smoothed and stayed smooth. Hobbs, near the back, did the smallest thing a man can do to be seen. He did not move. "First," James said, and his tone gentled the room without asking permission, "let us hear from those who accepted the week's charge." He did not call them in order of rank. He nodded, and Lady Margaret, with her bone-colored gloves, stepped forward. "A stallion," she said. "2 broodmares secured. Blood must be tended. We are not children." She inclined her head, as if to a fact. "Thank you," James said, the words exactly as heavy as they ought to be. Miss Lydia, pink at the cheek and sincere, confessed to the phaeton with scarlet wheels. "I will learn to drive it without alarming my father," she said, almost brave. "It will make our visits brisker." Again, "Thank you." Lady Arabella lifted her chin and let diamonds do the preface. "A rivière," she said. "For continuity. A family is a story told in objects as well as letters. I choose to write in light." "Thank you." Lady Honoria's silk sighed as she came forward. "We have duties to fashion and to civility," she said. "I have set orders with Paris. It is not vanity, it is rank behaving, so the lower orders need not be confused by mixed messages." "Thank you," James said, and Honoria's eyes flashed at the tone that did not elevate her. "Miss Whitlow." Silence changed shape. It had the weight of hope now and the possibility of insult. Nora stepped from the edge as a woman steps onto a boat she has built herself. She laid her stack of papers on the table at the foot of the dais. Her fingers knew the ribbon's knot without looking. "I chose to buy ends," she said. Her voice did not try to be grand enough for the room. It tried to be true enough for one person and let the room do what it liked. "Debts that should not have been, pressures that should not have pressed. Mrs. Peck, £2, 6, returned." She held up the receipt. The small crest in red wax caught light and told the truth without speaking. "Samuel Craddock, £1, returned. Corporal Ames, 4 and 2, returned. Mrs. Ellery, rent arrears, returned. Coal for the widow Barnes, paid." She set each on the table, building a little wall of paper. She lifted the deed. "I have also purchased a narrow plot beside the parish school, for a bench and a shelf, and, in time, a garden and a little library. The deed bears the estate crest. The original is here." A murmur moved, testing itself against the walls. Nora felt her own heart beat its own speech. "Do not be clever, be clear." James stepped forward a pace, not above her, but beside her. "Thank you," he said. He looked out over the room and let his breath show. "You have heard choices. You shall hear one more." He nodded, and the churchwarden walked up with the copy he had made in the small room off the ballroom, hands not shaking because the pen had taught them not to. James did not hold it up like a proclamation. He placed it on the table where receipts lay. "In the accounts of this house," he said, "there have been entries under the heading Extraordinary, collections made in the parish to steady the estate's books. They were ordered by the late Duke, initialed as H.R., and carried out by men with seals. A letter written to my mother speaks plainly of this, calls it reallocation, temporary." Silence gathered itself around the words until they were warmer than they had been on paper. Honoria's fan drooped and did not rise. "I do not use the dead as a shield," James said. "My father did what he thought necessary to keep appearance intact. He was wrong. If the house holds up its roof by leaning on those already bent, it is not a house I will live in." Calvert's hands folded with perfect patience. "Highness," he began, tone oiled to reason, but James did not yield him the floor. "Therefore," James said, and the word turned, "every shilling collected under Extraordinary shall be returned with interest from my own endowment. The ledger entries will be copied in full, copies deposited with the magistrate and the parish. There will be no more collections by threat of transfer. Mr. Hobbs is relieved of his duties as parish collector, pending the magistrate's decision. Mr. Sanderson will act as interim steward while this house is examined from cellars to roof. Mrs. Hallam," he turned and the schoolmistress straightened, not surprised and not prepared for being surprised, "will serve as trustee for a fund dedicated to the parish school, administered in public, accounts read aloud twice a year." Hobbs made a sound a man makes when his own name betrays him, a little barked breath. Calvert did not change colour. He changed temperature. Lady Arabella's hand rose to her diamonds, as if they might translate what had been said into a language she knew. Lady Margaret gave a small nod you could miss if you preferred to. Honoria found her voice and sent it out with a leash. "Your Highness," she said, sweet at the edges, "no one wishes the poor to be oppressed. We only wish the proper lanes to be observed. Surely this could have been handled privately." "No," James said quietly. "Privately is how this went wrong." The orchestra, uncertain whether to feel dismissed, stood still in its chairs. James turned, not on a heel but on a choice, to Nora. "In this test," he said, "I asked gold to show character. Some used it to purchase continuity or taste or speed or bloodlines. One used it to purchase breath." He let the words rest where they were needed. "She is the winner." It was not a performance. It was a sentence that landed on the table among the receipts and the copied ledger, and stayed there. A sound started at the back, neither cheers nor protest. It was a small bewilderment, trying to be decent. Thomas stood in the doorway, hat crushed in both hands, hair tidied as if going to church. He looked as if he had tried to make himself smaller and had failed, blessedly. Nora's throat shocked her with tears she had not invited. He moved forward as if someone had pushed him, Aunt Ida likely, and then checked himself at the line where a sister's dignity lives. "Thomas Whitlow," James said, catching the room before it made a fuss of itself, "released as of this morning. The arrears marked against him under Extraordinary are deemed satisfied by the estate." He glanced toward the constable, who had already learned to nod at the right places. "We will not use prison to settle our accounts with our conscience." Thomas, swallowing a boy's grin, bowed to the notion and then to his sister. He did not speak. He did not need to. Nora's grip on her ribbon tightened and eased. Something in her chest gave up trying to be a stone and let itself be water for a moment, then settled. Calvert stepped forward exactly one step. "Highness," he said, calm as a man setting a glass just so, "I beg you to consider. You are inviting the town to pry open its cupboard doors and call it virtue. There will be glee. There will be gossip. There will be blood from stones." James regarded him as one regards a useful instrument that has been misused. "There will be sunlight," he said. "If the house cannot bear it, it is not a house I will keep." He looked to the clerk of the magistrate, who had edged near the wall like ivy and now felt seen. "The copies will be ready tomorrow. You will receive them with the parish." Lady Arabella, clever even when wrong, found a handhold. "But the test," she said, attempting to coax the evening back into its dress. "Its purpose." James let a gentler expression touch him, one that did not melt so much as humanize. "The purpose," he said, "was always to learn what we value when we are watched, and when we are not. It appears I set the test for myself as much as for these women." That landed lightly and deeply at once. A murmur approving of humility did what murmurs do. It borrowed approval it had not earned. Nora did not murmur. She watched James with the new feeling of someone seeing a person step onto a road that will change him and those who follow him. He turned to her and lowered his voice the smallest degree, enough for her to feel the shift. "Miss Whitlow," he said, "there is one more announcement, if you permit it." She gave the little nod that means a woman is prepared to endure or enjoy the next thing in equal measure. "In 3 days' time," he said to the room, "we will lay the first stone for the parish library garden. Those who wish to see what purpose looks like in the sunlight may come. Bring no ribbons. Bring a spade. We will plant a tree." The room did not know what to do with that. It settled for a polite, confused expectation. He stepped down 3 steps, stopping not at the place where men of rank normally stop, but 1 step closer. "Miss Whitlow," he said, audible only to those who needed to hear, "if you will remain when we have done with speeches, I have something further to ask you, not for a crowd." She met his eyes, and in them found the steadiness he had found in hers. "Yes," she said, and the word felt like a small door opening onto air. The orchestra, grateful at last to be told what to do, took up a modest tune. Conversation resumed, slightly chastened, slightly brighter in places. Lady Margaret began discussing oats with a man who knew less about them than she did, and would never know it. Lady Arabella's diamonds did their best to continue being a Riviere. They succeeded, as diamonds do, at being themselves. Honoria's fan recovered enough to move air. Aunt Ida made her slow way to Nora's side and touched her elbow, as if checking whether it still existed. "Your brother looks less like a frown," she said, "and you look taller than your shoes." Nora laughed through the last of the tightness in her chest. "It is the ribbon," she said. She reached back and retied it, not because it had loosened, but because endings deserve a small, deliberate act. Music rose, talk softened and sharpened in its old patterns, and on the table, among the silver and the glass, the neat stack of receipts and the copied ledger sat like 2 ordinary objects that had taught a room to listen. Morning opened like a clean page. The parish green lay washed and bright, the grass sprung with dew, the school's whitewashed walls warming under a modest sun. Children came before they were called, as children will when the day smells of something new. They ran laps around a stack of boards that would be a shelf by noon, around a sapling staked to stand properly, around Mrs. Hallam, who stood at her door with chalk on her sleeves and pride on her face. Nora arrived early with the clock under one arm and a bundle of readers under the other. The ribbon at her nape felt like a decision retied. She set the clock on the sill and waited until the hands kissed an hour she could claim. Then she wound it with Mrs. Hallam, the key turning with that little grumble clocks make when they agree to keep time again. "Listen," Mrs. Hallam said, and the tick settled into the room as if it had always been there, only asleep. Aunt Ida came with a basket of buns and a look that dared any man to call them indulgent. Thomas followed, awkward in a clean coat, his hat in his hands, his hair fighting neatness like a cheerful rebellion. The churchwarden brought a trowel, and not enough patience, and Sanderson brought 2 more men, willing and bewildered, to help raise the shelf. They did not wait for uniforms. They waited for the person who had said he would come without them. James walked up the lane with his coat unbuttoned and his gloves in his pocket. He had no escort beyond the ordinary gaze of the village, which took in a prince in shirt sleeves and stored the sight in the places where stories are kept for winter. He lifted a hand to Aunt Ida, who nodded in a way that measured him. He bent his head to Mrs. Hallam as to a dean. He smiled at the children and watched them retreat in that half-courage way children have, like birds deciding whether a hand might be a branch. "Nora," he said, and the word found her where she stood with her palm on the sapling's slender trunk to keep it steady against an optimistic wind. He stopped near enough that she could feel his breath change shape before he spoke. "Do I help at once, or do I ask something first?" "Both," she said. "Help by asking." His mouth softened. He reached into his pocket and brought out the locket, polished and plain, its engraved letter catching the morning. He held it without pomp. "This," he said, low enough for her and whoever else needed to hear, "was never my father's to pawn. It is not mine to keep. I ask you to hold it as trustee of memory, to keep it beside the ledger, as we agreed, where children can learn the difference between sorrow and secrecy. "I will," she said. She did not take it immediately. She let the weight of the request rest on the air, then accepted it with both hands, not as a trinket but as a promise warm from his palm. The chain slid over her fingers like a small river finding its course. He exhaled, and courage borrowed his bones. "Then the second thing," he said. He did not kneel. It would have been a spectacle, and the grass was damp. He stood like a man asking for a partner in a task that would take years. "Nora Whitlow, will you take a place beside me? Not as ornament, not as excuse, as wife, as friend. As a voice I will be obliged to heed when the room prefers honey to truth. I offer not chandeliers, but a roof you will help mend, not silence, but a name that will stand where yours stands. I will fail sometimes. I will return to the right when I do. Will you have me?" The world did the smallest courteous thing and hushed. The children leaned on one another. Aunt Ada's basket hung without moving from her arm. A distant cartwheel decided to creak later. Nora looked at the man before her, and behind him saw the week like a road, the ballroom light that had not warmed, the ink, the shawl, the laugh that had cut, the list Hobbs had written without thought, Thomas's heat against her fingers through iron, the quiet table where a letter had waited. She did not imagine Jules. She imagined a shelf, a bench, a long line of days in which she would have to keep true when tired. She thought of her mother's temper that did not shout, and of a house's roof described as a thing to be mended, not a crown to be worn. "Yes," she said. She did not whisper. She did not raise her voice. She put her hand out and found his. "Yes." Something warm moved through the little crowd like a ripple in tall grass. It was not a cheer. It was relief finding a shape. Mrs. Hallam cleared her throat and produced a book of common prayer that had lived under a sensible cloth on her desk for years, waiting to be used properly. The churchwarden, startled into sanctity, declared that the ground was God's plenty, and as fine a place as any for vows, and Aunt Ida inquired tartly whether anyone had any lawful impediment to speak of. No one did. A boy in the third row had a hiccup, and then did not. They stood under the new sapling with the shelf boards stacked like a future unassembled at their backs. James took from his pocket a plain band, a circle with no story yet, and placed it on Nora's hand. It did not glitter. It fit. "I take you," he said, his voice steady as a weight placed on a beam to test its soundness. "To be my wife. I vow patience when pride would be quicker. I vow to sign my name to truth when it suits neither of us. I vow to hear you when rooms grow loud. I vow to stand where you stand when breath is at stake." Nora answered with a breath that came all the way from childhood. "I take you," she said, "to be my husband. I vow to tell you what you do not wish to hear when it is needed. I vow to be quiet enough to listen when what is needed is not me. I vow to keep our table honest and our door open, and to hold your name to the light when others try to shade it." They did not kiss as if paying the village for attending. They leaned their foreheads together for a long, ordinary moment, and the children yelped at the exact place where joy lives. Aunt Ada dabbed her eyes with a corner of her apron as if dust had flown up. Thomas made a sound he would later call a laugh if asked. After vows, work. It is what saves most celebrations from collapsing under their own sugar. Sanderson and the men set the uprights for the shelf while Mrs. Hallam and Nora measured the boards with the string they used for sums. James took off his coat and held the wood, while Thomas planed an edge with care learned in a workshop that did not yet have a roof. The churchwarden hammered in a nail and apologized to the wood when he bent it. Children fetched small stones to wedge the sapling's roots, and when they ran out of useful errands, they ran in circles that were just as useful. By noon, the shelf stood. It had a modest lip to keep books from slumping. The first readers took their places with the shyness of creatures that have never had their own stall. Mrs. Hallam wrote on a slip of paper and placed it under the stack. For borrowing, 2 days. For keeping, a lifetime. Nora set the locket on the top of the shelf beside the bound copy of the ledger, both objects quiet and sturdy, both deserving to be seen together. She placed in front of them a little card penned by the churchwarden with his best letters. "Memory and truth. Please handle." James looked at the 2 objects and then at Nora. "This shelf is finer than any cabinet in the hall," he said. "It smells less of polish and more of work," she answered, and he smiled because it was exactly right. They planted the tree in the afternoon. The churchwarden made a short speech about roots and shade that drifted into something like a sermon, and back again. Mrs. Hallam, who disliked ceremony unless it carried bread, stepped forward and spoke instead. "May those who sit here remember that paper does not exist to correct the poor, but to correct us all. May this tree carry what we plant in it, rest for tired legs, a story told better each year." Nora took the spade. James placed his hand over hers at the handle and pushed down with her, their effort one body. Soil fell aside. The sapling settled. The children stamped the earth gently in their small shoes until the ground felt convinced. Sanderson cut the ribbon Aunt Ida had tied around the stake, and someone, no one could later agree who, clapped first. They ate buns that had no right to be so good, and the clock ticked on, and afternoon wore toward evening. People drifted away to their work with that feeling in the chest that comes when a room has been made larger, without adding any feet to its walls. When it was quiet again, Mrs. Hallam contending with her chalk and the churchwarden, vowing to oil the hinge and then forgetting, Nora and James lingered inside the schoolroom with the last of the light. He had taken off his coat again and was setting an extra bracket beneath the second shelf with the stubborn attention of a man who wants a thing to hold. Nora sorted the readers by subject with the tidy joy of a person who has always liked a clean edge to a day. "Tomorrow," he said, not looking away from the screw that needed one more turn, "I will ride to the magistrate. Calvert will be confronted with his own tidy ruin. We will replace the habits that built this mess with ones that do not appeal to men who like corridors." "Tomorrow," she said, though the word felt less like the next sunrise and more like a long road with shade where needed. He set down the tool and looked at her with that steadiness again, the one that had made it possible to breathe in rooms that had been arranged to take breath away. "There will be days," he said, "when my name is heavy on your shoulders. Say so. Do not let the house teach you to carry what it should not. And there will be days," she said, "when my temper wants to turn the hall into a bonfire. Say so. Do not let me play at righteousness when repair is what is called for." He laughed then entirely, the sort of laugh that finds a place in a house and stays there. It made him handsomer and more like himself. He reached for her hand, and she did not pretend to be surprised. He laced their fingers and set their joined hands on the shelf between history and hope. Through the open window, the village went about its business. A sparrow argued with a bee, a cartwheel complained and then relented. Somewhere, Aunt Ada told Mrs. Peck the piece of news that would be told in 10 kitchens by supper time. The prince married a maid and then held a board while she measured it. And the news, in that phrasing, was better than scandal. It could feed a winter. Later, at the cottage, Aunt Ida tied the blue ribbon at Nora's nape herself, as if sealing a letter, and kissed her hair. Thomas drank a mug of something celebratory and tried to give a speech and failed and hugged both of them instead. The evening closed like two good hands meeting. In the weeks that followed, there were papers to sign and meetings to endure, and the slow satisfaction of wrong columns turned right. Hobbs discovered the small relief of being told exactly what not to do. Calvert's fall was brittle and neat. He left with a case that looked like a friend and never had been. Sanderson read numbers with a frown that meant hope, and Mrs. Hallam drew up a tidy account of the school fund and read it aloud under the tree to any who wanted to learn the new language of their own lives. Nora learned the hall's corners without becoming a corner. She learned where a woman's word would carry and where it would not, and made bridges where they were missing. She sat with James at tables where names used to be prices and now were guests. When the house wanted pomp, she let it have dignity instead. When the village wanted a hero, she gave it a shelf and a bench and time. Some evenings, when their day had been light enough to permit it, James and Nora walked the lane by the river and spoke of nothing in particular. He told her about an odd habit of his horse that no one else noticed. She told him about the way a child reads when he believes no one is watching. Their hands found each other without ceremony, more often than not where the road bent. And when dusk called people indoors, they would return to the school to check the lock and the clock. James would lift a new shelf into its brackets, coat off, shirt cuffs pillowed back. Nora would set a book lightly in its place and look up to see him more clearly than before. The locket rested above the ledger, together on the top where hands could see them if they cared to, where children could point and be told a story that was not a fairy tale and ended better. On the day the first small library register filled with names, neat, wobbly, proud, Nora wrote beneath the last entry a line on a card and set it in the frame on the shelf where people could not claim to have missed it. Mercy is quiet. Make it loud. If you are listening, take this with you. Gold dazzles for an evening, justice warms for a lifetime. In any age, the bravest purchase is freedom, sometimes for ourselves, often for one another. Spend whatever you are given, your voice, your chance, your love, lifting those who cannot yet breathe, and you will find at last that you can. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.